Book of Job. The Gospel according to Job. We are going to conclude chapter 36 and chapter 37 today. If you remember last time, we cut it off a little short of 36 because it just flows better from 36:26 into the end of 37. And then 38 comes, and it might be the chapter many of you are just kind of wringing your hands to get to hear how the Lord will talk to Job. But there's a bit of a precursor here in 36 and 7. How Elihu finishes his speech to Job is very, very similar to how God will speak to Job. So these are Elihu's last words. They are the last words of Elihu to Job. What would your last words be, sitting in sympathy with a sufferer? What would the last paragraphs, sentences be? If you could sit with a sufferer and tell him something, tell her something. That's Elihu here. Elihu has heard all sorts of right and wrong from the other three friends. Mostly wrong, but they do get some things right. He heard all sorts of right and wrong things from Job. Mostly right, but sometimes wrong. We can't say all of Elihu's words are perfect, but he does come with a lot more of a God-centered consciousness than Job does, and the other three. So, if you were Elihu, what would you want to make sure someone received and they took home? In preaching class, some of you are professional educators, and you know this. You want to get one thing across. If you can just get one laser beam message across, what would it be to the one who suffers? Well, you have to know something about the sufferer, right? You got to know your audience. Well, we should know that sufferers, who are us at any time during the week, any time during the day, sufferers tend to shrink the world and interpret life through their present crisis. Okay? You understand that's what sufferers do. They shrink the world, and that makes their problems bigger. And that's not good, right? Sufferers also tend to forget God and focus on self and ability. Forget God, and they just think, well, what they can do, right? And this contributes to their loneliness. Sufferers also think of God harshly. I don't mean think harshly. They think of God as harsh. God is disinterested in their life. God is actually figured out. There's actually a lot bit of pride going on in the heart of the sufferer. They think they have God paid, and they know what he's doing. They tend to question his goodness. That would be another area sufferers tend to live. They live in questions. How? Why? When? What? They live in questions and they don't worship. Sufferers are often hopeless, weak in faith, not strong in faith, not looking towards tomorrow, glory, but just the present crisis. And specifically in unjust suffering, undeserved suffering, right? Like Job, that's when we think the worst. We think God is actively against us. God isn't just passive, he's actively against us. That's terrible. It's tragic. Generally speaking, the sufferer thinks wrongly of self, world, and God. That's not a good trifecta to get wrong. And in this sense, that sufferer is me. It's you. It's anybody. Various times of heightened suffering, for sure. Specific suffering, for sure. Unjust suffering, for sure. But this is what the suffering thinks like, looks like, feels like, and does. So what should be said to the sufferer? Just a very simple message. That God is great, He's good. That's what needs to be told to the sufferer. The subject is God, not the person, not the suffering, not the experiences, the circumstances. Talk about God. They're enveloped in their own black hole of suffering. And they need to be brought out of that and think about God. And they need to think about God as great and good. Great and good. 36:26 to the end of 37 is just full of illustrations. Just chock full of various illustrations, mainly of storms, snowstorms, thunderstorms, and such. But at the end of the day, Elihu was saying, you haven't considered God well enough, Job. You haven't thought about God rightly. You don't think about Him enough, and when you do, it's wrong. Mostly. So this is what we need to tell the sufferer. God is great and He's good. God is great and He's good. 3 ways in which we need to tell the sufferer He's great and good. First, God is great and incomprehensible, yet intelligible. God is great and incomprehensible, yet He is intelligible. He is unknown and known at the same time. So, follow along as I read 36:26 to the end of the chapter. Elihu says, behold, God is great, and we know Him not. The number of His years is unsearchable, for He draws up the drops of water. They distill His mist in rain, which the skies pour down and drop on mankind abundantly. Can anyone understand the spreading of the clouds? The thunderings of His pavilion? Behold, He scatters His lightning about Him and covers the roots of the sea. For by these He judges peoples. He gives food in abundance. He covers His hands with the lightning and commands it to strike the mark. Its crashing declares His presence. The cattle also declare that He rises. Cattle take cover. So this is God. He is great. He is incomprehensible. He is beyond our understanding, yet He is also known and intelligible. So He's great and incomprehensible in verses 26 to 29-ish. God's greatness with it carries a mystery. He's great and we know Him not. The saint admits, I know God and yet I don't know God. I know Him, but He's so far past my understanding, I don't know all of Him. But yet at the same time, I know enough that whatever sample size I know of Him is true of all of Him. Because if I know Christ, I know God. So His greatness carries with it this mystery. He is great and yet not fully exhaustively known. Indeed, what makes Him great is that He can't be known completely. Would you love Him if you comprehended all of His ways? Would you become bored with God if you actually knew everything about Him? So He's great, and He carries with Him this greatness, carries with it this mystery. And Elihu then starts to use various actions in the heavenly places, earthly heavenly places, storms, snow, lightning, clouds, and such. For the rest of this chapter, this speech, to talk about, Job, you don't even know the clouds. How can you know God? You don't even know. Now, we would say, okay, 27 to 29, clearly, or 27 to 28, clearly show hydrological cycle of evaporation, precipitation, condensation, right? And that happens. We know that. We know how that happens because we live in a scientific world. That's not the point necessarily. We could move that illustration into space nebulas or things of the galaxy. We would still have the same point. We don't get creation completely. If we don't get creation completely, How can we know the Creator completely? When the creation is just the fringes of his ways. Right? So this is what Elihu is proving. He argues from the lesser, storms and lightning and all that, to the greater, God. It says he draws up the drops of water, he causes it to evaporate, he rains it down, and this series goes forth. He spreads out the clouds, verse 29, the thunderings of his pavilion, his tent, right? How can you figure this out, Job? He scatters his lightning about him and covers the roots of the sea. It's interesting, there's a bit of just a play on words there in 29. The thunderings of his pavilion, the Greek word, forgive me, the Hebrew word, just tent. Same kind of booths Israelites would make in the wilderness, right? And you would see that word if you read Hebrew, and you'd be like, oh, the thunderings of his tent. Oh, well, the thunderings of, what's the sound coming out of human tents? Pots and pans clanging, maybe children playing around. What's the sound that comes out of God's tent, right? Thunder, power, right? And he scatters this lightning because he's in complete sovereign control of it. He covers the roots of the sea. All over creation, he shows his supremacy over all. He is completely great, and because of that, completely unable to be exhaustively known by you and I. But he's still known. Because in 31, he judges people by these things. He gives food in abundance. The same storm cloud that brings judgment and wildfire will bring rain later and life. This is how the Lord works. His lightning shows his hands are nearby. He commands the lightning to strike exactly where it strikes. Even though we see lightning in the distance, and it just briefly, and you see it, the tendrils and the lightning go every which way, and you think, well, where is it going to go? But he knows exactly where it's going to go. And as verse 33 sounds, it does sound like crashing. Been near a thunderstorm, or maybe in one, and you realize, I'm out of my depths. I am way, way over my head in the power department. My spleen and lungs shakes when I feel the thunder. And these are things that just come out of God's house. The cattle get it. Oh, storm's coming. Let's head. Right? This is what Elihu is saying to Job. He is beyond your understanding, but it doesn't mean he can't be known. The thunder, the clouds, the storm imagery is all over the Old Testament to prove God's greatness. In Psalm 29, we have this glorious hymn to the Lord. The voice of the Lord, I'm going to use the Hebrew word, the voice of Yahweh is over the waters. The God of glory thunders, Yahweh over many waters. The voice of Yahweh is powerful. The voice of Yahweh is full of majesty. The voice of Yahweh breaks the cedars. Yahweh breaks the cedars of Lebanon. He makes Lebanon to skip like a calf, and Sirion like a young wild ox. Wild ox. The voice of Yahweh flashes forth flames of fire. The voice of Yahweh shakes the wilderness. Yahweh shakes the wilderness of Kadesh. The voice of Yahweh makes the deer give birth and strips the forest bare. And in his temple all cry, glory! That's the voice of God. It's amazing that the Hebrew writers of Scripture would use the storm as a common reference point to God's speech. Oh, show me your glory, God, or tell me, talk to me. That's like saying, strike the lightning right next to me. No, we would not want that. We'd be terrified. What is God proving by this? Man's not in charge. Man is not in charge. God's in charge. And as powerful as his voice is, it is also life-giving. The voice of the Lord is powerful. It's also gentle and life-giving. It breaks the cedars of Lebanon into toothpicks. And it's gentle enough to cause the deer to give birth. The voice of the Lord is behind all things. And Elihu here uses the storm as an illustration of God's voice, which is what we see in the opening verses of 37. So God is great and incomprehensible, but he's also known and intelligible. He can be known. So the second point here in verses 37, 1 to 13, God is great, and his speech ought to humble and bring wonder, not opposition. When God speaks, we should humble ourselves. We should be in awe and wonder, not brazenly oppose him, like Job has. 37 verse 1. There would be no break in Elihu's original speech here. So the cattle declare that he rises, and at this, Elihu says, at this thinking, my heart trembles and leaps out of its place. Keep listening to the thunder of his voice and the rumbling that comes from his mouth. Under the whole heaven he lets it go, his lightning to the corners of the earth. After it his voice roars. He thunders with his majestic voice, and he does not restrain the lightnings when his voice is heard. God thunders wondrously with his voice. He does great things that we cannot comprehend. For to the snow, he says, fall on the earth. Likewise to the downpour, his mighty downpour. He seals up the hand of every man, that all men whom he made may know it. Then the beasts go into their lairs and remain in their dens. From its chamber comes the whirlwind, and cold from the scattering winds. By the breath of God ice is given, and the broad waters are frozen fast. He loads the thick cloud with moisture. The clouds scatter his lightning. They turn around and around by his guidance to accomplish all that he commands them on the face of the habitable world. Whether for correction, or for his land, or for love, he causes it to happen. Again, Elihu is just pouring out what God does, just a little snippet, and say, and God does this so you know this. He does all these things, but also so that you know it. So God is great, and his speech here is compared with the thunder. Another argument of lesser to greater. It's proper to, as Elihu shows here, to tremble. It's only proper and normal to have your heart leap out of place thinking about God, or analogously thinking about a lightning storm. It's abnormal and wrong to be unmoved by a lightning storm. Many of you have been in that country much more than I have, but I would still argue it doesn't matter how many lightning storms you've seen. You don't want to tangle with it. It would be abnormal to be unmoved by a powerful storm. And yet, we are many times unmoved by God's voice. That's Elihu's point. He says, Job, you're not functioning rightly. Your suffering has caused you to think all backwards. You should be greatly moved by this. My heart trembles. How are you not trembling, Job? And so he just to paraphrase the first 7 verses here, he says, You have not been properly humbled, Job. Let me paint for you another picture so that you would be humbled. God's powerful voice is like a thunderstorm. Understand that he lets his lightning fly all over the creation, verse 3. Both eye and ear are witnesses to his power, verse 4. He works past our comprehension, verse 5. He does great things that we cannot comprehend. The great deluge and downpour of the earth that he commands that say, fall on the earth, that comes from him. And all this makes man stop working. That would be the meaning of verse 7. He seals up the hand of every man. It means everyone, the storm comes, everyone stops working, they go inside and they take cover. They go in their dens, they go in their homes. Man stops working, and the beasts, verse 8, go into their lairs. It's only normal to see an approaching thunderstorm and say, we got to take cover. It's only normal to take cover. And there's a play on words here. In verses 8 and 9, the beasts go into their lairs, they remain in their dens, and from its chamber comes the whirlwind. And even the whirlwind has a den. They're just God's pets. Even the whirlwind and the storm has a lair, and God commands it to go out from there, scattering winds. And by the breath of God, this happens. It's only completely abnormal, maybe insane, to brazenly oppose God's thunderous voice. Isaiah 66:2. How should someone respond to God's voice? God's word? This is the one to whom I will look. He who is humble and contrite in spirit and trembles at my word. There's no pietistic extra credit points for being bold and unafraid and unmoved by God. We ought to be moved. We ought to be stirred. It's only normal. I keep thinking about our backpacking trip a couple of years ago in the Bighorns. After that night goes through and the storm goes through, and we thought we're like in the clouds, and it was probably still however far away, shaking. Our insides are shaking, and that's all we got to talk about the next morning. If one of you guys had come along, or I had, we got up in the next morning, made our oatmeal, didn't talk about anything, what lightning storm? We'd say, are you crazy? You don't have a proper radar for fear. You don't have a proper respect for danger. And so Job, or any sufferer who hears God's voice and doesn't tremble, doesn't have a proper fear of God. Doesn't have the proper respect for the Creator. If we tremble at God's little pets of thunder, how much more would we just shake and cower before the God of thunder, the God of glory? This is Elihu's point. He says, dear sufferer, your sense of suffering has swallowed up your fear of God, and you are in danger. And yet, at the same time, this happens, and it's done for a reason. Verse 13. Whether for correction, or for his land, or for love, he causes it to happen. These voices of God, these words of God, the storms of God that he communicates into our lives happen for a reason. And he wants you to know he's actually behind it. He wants you to know I'm behind the storm. Or I am in the storm. He doesn't say, I'm afraid you're going to think ill of me, that I'm a bad God, and I don't have anything to do with the storm. No, the Bible actually says, no. He creates light, well-being, And I love how verse 13 says, for his land. It's God's land. It's God's thunderstorm. It's God's weeds, God's meadow, God's mountain, God's earth. It's God's world. And for us to say, oh, I'm sorry if this feels cold. For us to say, oh, woe is me for what is happening to me. There are a lot bigger things going on in the world than just what you're experiencing. Even though what you're experiencing is completely valuable and important. But he does this for his own land. He does this for correction. And he does this for love. That's the voice of the Lord. The sufferer needs to know. The sufferer desperately wants to know why and why things are happening. You almost don't need to even suffer to ask those questions. You just ask, why did that? The sufferer desperately wants to know why things are happening, but we don't need to know all of God's ways to trust one of his ways. You only need to know one of God's ways to trust all of God's ways. And the supreme and greatest word from God is Jesus Christ crucified. And if you know that way, that word, that message, it's enough. It's enough. You, all of us, what's happening? What's this going to impact here or there? We don't have to dissect God's ways. All we have to know is that God works in a good way. The gospel tells us he works good. And we know the gospel way, and we can trust all of God's ways. Mankind, created, righteousness, holiness, falls into sin. God could have immediately exiled Adam and Eve. Immediately. And he would have been perfectly good and just. But what does he do? He slaughters an animal. Covers the shame of Adam and Eve. What's God's response to sin? Covering shame. If you're ever suffering and you want to ask, does God care about my feelings? Of course he cares about your feelings. He covers your shame. And just imagine Adam and Eve looking at a dead animal for the first time. Life is all around them. Rosebuds, tulips, fig trees, palm trees, elm trees, whatever. Life. And then the first time, death. And just seeing a carcass, an animal, dead. There's no life in that thing. The eyes are open, but it's dead. And I am wearing it. And I'm covered by the death of the sacrifice. That's the gospel. We're dead in sin. And Christ covers you in his robes of righteousness at the expense of his own death. Now, is that way good? Yes, it is. All you need to know is the gospel way, and you can trust everything that God does is good. You don't have to know everything that happens in life. All you need to know is the gospel good? Yes, because he works in accordance with himself. I like these words from Psalm 113. What does God think about the little person? He raises the poor from the dust and lifts the needy from the ash heap. Why? To make them sit with princes. Not to okay, I'm gonna lift you up, sweep off the home floor there and put you back on your chair and live with your other normal people. No, I'm gonna you up and put you with the most noble, the most dignified, the most honored people on the planet. Right? To make them sit with princes and the princes of his people, he gives the barren woman a home, making her the joyous mother of children. The sufferer wants to understand God's ways of goodness and justice. Just consider the gospel, the goodness of Christ coming and dying to give us life, and that should humble us and give us wonder. And then lastly here, so God is great in that he's incomprehensible yet intelligible. Incomprehensible yet known. He's great, and his words of greatness ought to humble us. We shouldn't oppose it. And then lastly, he is great and he is unquestionable. Here is 101% of us here. He is unquestionable. Verses 14 to 24. This would be Elihu's application part of his sermon. Hear this, O Job. Stop and consider the wondrous works of God. That's what we will do. Do you know how God lays his command upon them and causes his lightning of his cloud to shine? Do you know the balancings of the clouds, the wondrous works of him who is perfect in knowledge? You, whose garments are hot when the earth is still because of the south wind. Can you, like him, spread out the skies, hard as cast metal mirror? Teach us what we shall say to him. We cannot draw up our case because of darkness. Shall it be told him that I would speak? Did ever a man wish that he would be swallowed up? And now no one looks on the light when it is bright in the skies, when the wind has passed and cleared them. Out of the north comes golden splendor. God is clothed with awesome majesty. The Almighty, you cannot find him. He is great in power. Justice and abundant righteousness he will not violate. Therefore men fear him. He does not regard any who are wise in their own conceit. So God is great and he is unquestionable. We are urged to bring our complaints to God in Scripture, but never to complain in a way that charges God with wrong. You can read the Psalms and you can read David in a good way, pouring out his heart in a very raw and emotional way. But we are never to charge God with wrong. That would be an unbiblical kind of complaint. And Elihu does what he's been doing in this last speech of his. He argues from the lesser to the greater. Stop and consider the wondrous works of God. You don't even know his creation. How can you say you know the Creator? Do you? And he has this do you, can you? And he's putting Job in his place. Do you know how God lays his command upon them, that is the lightnings, and causes them out of his cloud to shine? Do you know how you see a cloud in the distance and it's dark and it's foreboding and there's lightning just sparkling and shining out? Tell us how that happens, Job. Can you get in there and figure that out for us? Do you know the balancings of the clouds? Why some seasons would have a heavy downpour of rain and then a famine? Do you know the wondrous works of him who is perfect in knowledge? At this point, Job and us should be saying, So there is this great, do you know how this great Creator does this? You're at the mercy, you're affected by such great power. How could you talk to the one who affects the great power? So in verse 17, you whose garments are hot when the earth is still because the south wind, since I think chapter 1, the Sirocco, the south wind, has come and laid waste to Job's buildings and homes. And that has been mentioned throughout the speeches. And he says, Job, this Sirocco that makes just life irritable. A hot wind comes and blows the sand. The sand's all in your clothes, and it's just itchy and irritating, and you're at the mercy of this thing. How could you possibly rise above it and talk to the man who commanded it? Can you, like him, spread out the skies, hard as cast metal mirror? So, mirrors in the ancient world were of bronze. And so they're not thinking glass, they're thinking bronze, and it's a bronze expanse, a bronze firmament, because it's blocking the rain from coming, right? Can you do that, Job? Teach us what we shall say to him. We cannot draw up our case because of darkness. He's God of light. We're in darkness. Even the believer who knows God is in relative darkness compared to the brightness and the effulgence of God. And if you ever did want to talk to him, did you know, verse 20? You're just asking to be swallowed up. And he goes on and he says, understand this. Out of the north comes golden splendor. Okay? Elihu doesn't have his compass mixed up. He's not talking about the sunrise, the golden splendor. Out of the north, he's talking about out of the north comes golden splendor. Mentioned this a couple times in chapters previous. The north refers to Zaphon, Mount Zaphon. It just refers to a place in the ancient Near East that they would think is really the Mount Olympus of the gods of the day. Baal is there, other gods are there. That's where the divine council of so-called gods live, right? The north, Mount Zaphon. And Elihu says, God comes from the north. Forget Baal, forget all these other so-called gods. God comes and he's clothed with awesome majesty, which means he's not actually robed, but to wear clothes is an extension of one's character. So God's character is awesome. His character is majestic. He's almighty. And there's an in dash there, and Elihu just breaks off and says, you can't even find him. You can't even search for him. How do you even try? He's great in power, and he's good. He won't violate justice. He has abundant righteousness. And he closes on a very important note here. For this reason, men fear him. It's only proper that men would fear him. Because God does not regard any who are wise in their own conceit. Literally, God does not regard any who are wise in their own heart. Men who are wise in their own heart. And it's a perfect juxtaposition between 36:5 and 37:24. There's God, strong in heart. Strong in heart. And there's man, wise in his own heart, wise in his own conceit. And there exists a gap. God does not regard the man who thinks he is wise. God regards the person who says, I'm not wise. In fact, I'm a donkey. But oh, reveal your gospel to me. Help me just accept your ways, not fight them. The sufferer must be urged to go to God and pour out his heart, but be careful not to question God's ways, because he is perfect and past our understanding. For a sinner, sufferer, human being, anybody, to say to God, help me understand the depths of your ways. It's the same as saying, God, help me fly like a bird on my own power. It is impossible. you're asking the very thing you're prohibited from having. What we are not prohibited from having is trust and faith in the Lord. Faith says, I don't understand all God's ways, but I know He's good. That's all I need. Help me believe. Help me trust in you, Lord. I don't get it. I don't know why I'm suffering unjustly, says Job. But he should have stopped after chapter 2. Never opened his mouth in chapter 3. Blessed be the name of the Lord. He gives and He takes away. Woman, shall we not accept evil if we accept good? Those are perfect theological words. Just stop there. Instead, Job goes on. What does the sufferer do? They talk too much. They don't listen. Talk. Not ears. And as I know I've said this before, my kids, as they know this, as they're looking through their pencil, how many eyes, or how many ears has God given you? How many mouths has He given you? One mouth. 2 ears. Double the work on the one. Or I should say, for the 2. Listen. Listen to God. And at the end of the day, just pray. Help me understand. The sufferer needs to be told God is great and He is good. The sufferer undoubtedly senses injustice, wants to know the whys and the hows, and you can tell them, hey, I got a great sermon for you. God is great and incomprehensible, but He's not completely exhausted. God is great and His voice is powerful, but it's to be feared, not presumed on. And God is great and He is unquestionable. Don't ever question His ways. Does He invite questions? Absolutely. But He doesn't say, go ahead and blaspheme me and charge me of wrong. At the end of the day, Elihu's speeches have shown this. There are great heights of injustice in the world. True injustice, real injustice, personal injustice, corporate injustice, evil things. There is real injustice in the world, but it will most assuredly be dealt with by the greatness and the power of God. He brings God in this picture to show He's great and powerful, to show He's great and powerful over all things. Not just you, O little Job, but all people. And Job will get that message because that's essentially the same message God will teach him. Don't question my ways. You want a battle? Don't question my ways. I'm showing you my exalted power so that you know my exalted justice overall. There will be no injustice in my world. I am abundant in righteousness. I will not violate. For that reason, we can take comfort because He's for us. He's for you. He loves you. He's given His Son for you. We should trust Him. Let's pray. Oh, gracious Heavenly Father, we stand before these words, and even a brief explanation of them leaves us trembling. Cause us to see ourselves as small and Yourself as great. Teach us to tremble at Your word. Teach us that Your ways are not to be questioned, but simply trusted in.